Hi, I'm Rabbi Jason Holtz from Temple Kilat Chaim in Roswell, Georgia. Did Moses, most important prophet in all of Jewish tradition, ever become a bar mitzvah? So bar mitzvah is a major rite of passage for a Jewish child. It means that a young Jewish boy becomes 13, or a bat mitzvah is a young Jewish girl becomes an adult. Traditionally, sometimes it's believed to be 12 for a girl. In our temple, in the Reform tradition, generally, it's usually 13. But a young Jewish child turns a certain age, and all of a sudden they become a bar mitzvah. We talk about this meaning sometimes that they've become an adult in Jewish tradition, or they're ready for more responsibilities, or they're transitioning into maturity, however we understand it. The word bar mitzvah really means somebody who is responsible for the mitzvot, the commandments, the sacred Jewish obligations. And it's something that's expected of somebody a certain age and above, but not necessarily of small children. Parents are responsible for the child's behavior when they're little. It's only as they get older that they accept that responsibility for themselves. So, really big deal nowadays to become a bar mitzvah. And Moses, really big deal of a person in the Hebrew Bible. Did he ever become a bar mitzvah? So let me give you the short answer and then the longer answer. Short answer is there was no such thing as a bar mitzvah during the time of Moses. At least in the Torah, we never find that phrase, so-and-so became a bar mitzvah, so-and-so had a bar mitzvah, which isn't great Hebrew, by the way. We become bar mitzvah. We become adults, or we become older, or we become more responsible. We don't have a bar mitzvah. So, big deal, but it's never mentioned in the Torah. So in that sense, yeah, we never read about Moses becoming a bar mitzvah. On the other hand, Moses does get older, and he does get more responsible. So Moses didn't have a normal childhood by any measure whatsoever. When he was born, at that time, Pharaoh had told the Egyptians to try and kill every Hebrew baby boy. It was a way to kind of wipe out the Israelites. Well, Moses was born into that world, but Moses' mother actually put him in a basket and floated him down the Nile River out of the hopes that perhaps he'd have the slim chance of surviving. But normally, you'd think putting a baby in a basket and floating it down the river, not a great idea if you want the baby to live, but she felt like she didn't really have any other choice. But luckily for Moses and Moses' family and the rest of the Jewish people, Moses is found in his basket by none other than Pharaoh's daughter. And she has her servants take Moses out of the river, and she takes him in. But Moses needs a nurse. And actually, the way it turns out is Moses' own mother is available to nurse Moses, and that's who Pharaoh's daughter gets. It's not clear that Pharaoh's daughter realizes the connection between the nurse that she's hiring to nurse Moses and that's actually Moses' real mother, but that's what happens. A little bit later, as Moses is getting older and he no longer needs the care of a nurse, the Torah says that Moses grew up. So in this sense, we think that what it means is Moses simply got older to the point where he didn't need a baby's milk anymore, or mother's milk for a baby anymore. That it really is just chronological age. And you know what? There are plenty of old people out there who technically a bar mitzvah because they're old enough, they're technically adults, but other than age, there's nothing about them that says this is a responsible person. Okay, so that's the first time that it says Moses grew up. But the very next verse, it says, and Moses grew up. It repeats itself, which is kind of weird because the Torah normally doesn't repeat itself unless there's a reason to. So it says Moses grew up, and then he went out amongst his people, and he saw, perhaps for the first time in his life, what was really going on, how awful the Israelites are being treated by the Egyptians. And Moses, the Hebrew Bible says, he looks this way, he looks that way, and he sees nobody around. And at that point, he intervenes and he stops the Egyptian taskmaster from beating the Israelite, actually kills the Egyptian taskmaster in the process. And some rabbis are a little critical of Moses for taking a life. It's not great, even if it was in defense of a Hebrew slave. But Moses looks around, sees nobody, stops the Egyptian taskmaster. Now, you could read that a few different ways. The most obvious way, at least to me, is that Moses was worried about getting caught, and he didn't want to get caught, and he looked around, he didn't see anybody watching, so he intervened. That's one way. Another way, which over time I've come to become more convinced as a better interpretation is that Moses looked around and he didn't see a single person who was bothered enough by what was going on that they actually stood up in defense of a slave and tried to do something to stop the taskmaster from beating the poor slave. From not that any one individual could stop slavery. Well, Moses did, but with God on his side. But nobody was doing anything. Terrible things going on, and not a single person did a single thing. So Moses looked around, he saw nobody standing up for the dignity of this poor slave, and he said, I'm going to do something about it. And that's what he did. And then a short while later, Moses sees two Hebrews fighting, and he intervenes there. And then after that, Moses flees Egypt because at this point in the story, he's worried that he's going to be in big trouble for killing that Egyptian taskmaster a little while earlier. So he flees Egypt, but when he's out of Egypt, he's in a place called Midian, and he sees some women being harassed at a well. And once again, he intervenes and he does his best to stop it. So you get three stories about Moses kind of going out of his way to help fix something that's going on, or to help address some sort of injustice or inequality or just problem that he's coming across. And all of that is described after, quote, he grew up. So in this sense, yeah, Moses did become a bar mitzvah. If what we mean by a bar mitzvah is somebody who accepts upon themselves, or somebody who is responsible, somebody who accepts that responsibility for themselves. Somebody who's committed themselves to not just have personal responsibility, not just to look after themselves, but really to look out for people around them. You know, the Torah begins with story of creation. Not long after, you get the first two siblings, Cain and Abel. Cain kills Abel, and then when God asks Cain where Abel is, Cain responds by saying, am I my brother's keeper? Am I supposed to be concerned for my brother, for somebody else? The rest of the Torah is an answer to that question, am I my brother's keeper? And the answer is emphatically, yeah, you are. If somebody else is in trouble and you can do something about it, then absolutely. Absolutely. And that's what Moses does. Moses is somebody who could have lived a great life as a member of the Egyptian royal household. He was adopted by Pharaoh's daughter. He had it set. He had like the best job as an Egyptian prince. And yet that wasn't enough for him because there was too much going on in the world that wasn't right. And he wanted to be a part of the solution rather than live a nice, comfortable, but otherwise meaningless life. And that's who Moses is. Great guy. And eventually he's called upon to be God's prophet. But that's later on in the story. Before any of that, Moses is somebody who really cared. Somebody who cared enough to try and do the right thing. So yeah, Moses was a bar mitzvah. Now, that all happens in this week's Torah portion, Shemot, which is the very first Torah portion in the second book of the Bible, Exodus. And things are only going to heat up from here. There's more to learn, so stick around, tune in, like the video, subscribe to the video, share it with your friends, and I hope to keep on learning with you. Bye now.